All right, you're listening to Edge Radio 99.3. This is Media Tackle. I'm Craig Norris, PhD.
That was strong.
It was a dramatic pause.
Yeah.
And I'm joined there by the voice of Jack Ellis. Jack, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Jack Ellis, PhD candidate.
Yeah.
And I've brought you in today because you're doing a fantastic research project that's in its final minutes.
Yes, it's crawling across the line.
Days, weeks. You're submitting this project in early next year.
Yes.
So what I've got you into is to kind of debrief, to talk a little bit about this project, which I will tell the title of now. I hope everyone's sitting down. The title of the thesis project is Music Collecting in the Streaming Era: Materiality, Practices, and Discovery. And full disclosure, of course, I know quite a lot about Jack's project. I've been involved with helping to supervise it over the last
It's almost been 4,
years.
I think, yeah.
As well as before that honours research project. What was your honours project on?
Yeah, it was in a very similar space. It was I think it was a bit more vinyl heavy. I think this time around we're definitely moving into the current streaming era.
That's right. So I remember that. So the honours project was around vinyl collecting. And then the PhD, yes, has been exploring this world of Spotify, all of your other streaming services, and the impact that's made on collecting in particular.
Yes.
But let's set the scene.
Yeah.
Set the scene. Now, for me, when I was way back talking to you about projects and research around music, one of the things that I always think about when I'm trying to develop a project is how does this cut into the public conversation? Right? What's the public conversation? And there was a news story way back 2012, which really blew my mind because it, of course, involved Bruce Willis, famous Hollywood actor who, as Christmas approaches, many people will now be watching Die Hard. So he's a perennial figure. And in 2012, there was a fantastic story, which was the headline of which was Bruce Willis to sue iTunes over his collection. Do you remember this story? I'm going to bring it up on my computer.
Yeah, I suppose at that time it was in the where you bought an MP3 file, right?
Yeah, we must. So 2012. When did do you remember any dates for like streaming and Spotify?
Yeah, well, I think there has been like fledgling streaming forms for a little while, but nothing like the services we see now. But I feel like this is definitely in that kind of, is it a la carte? That's the model, I think it's called. Yeah.
A la carte.
A la carte. Yeah. So you kind of,
yeah.
You buy what you want to buy. And the big issue was that if he was to pass, regrettably.
That's right. If Bruce Willis was to die, to leave this mortal coil and go to Hollywood heaven,
then he could not leave his music collection to his children?
Yes. So the story that was around Bruce Willis, and we should say right away that this story ended up being fake news. So it wasn't even a real story, unfortunately, but it did generate a lot of, like, Rolling Stone featured it, a number of magazines leapt on it.
Yes, and it featured in my introduction, I believe. So it was useful in that respect.
And yeah, it was that the rumor went that Willis had amassed a huge, an abnormally enormous collection of music that was digital. The article says here, everything from Led Zeppelin to Adele, which seems to be like the alphabet is working weirdly there. Okay. But yeah, anyway, a huge collection, and that he was distressed that he couldn't bequeath this collection to his children as an inheritance.
Yes.
And this has some reality to it, right? Particularly, like, I know your own research on vinyl music collecting.
Yeah.
This idea of bequeathing collections, it does have currency, doesn't it?
I think even in a broader collection sense, I mean, I think it's particularly relevant because music collecting is such a popular kind of practice, or has been. But even in, if mum or dad has a great art collection or something, I'm sure that, if it's of some sentimental or monetary value, then, it's probably on its way over.
And did you get any of your collection inherited?
No, actually, my parents didn't have any records, which is weird because now I really like records. So yeah, I guess I'm part of the rebirthing of the vinyl in the like kind of digital context.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've come into vinyl
Post crash.
not introduced you to it. So the story with Bruce Willis, while it ended up being fake, nevertheless did set up a really interesting discussion around, well, who does own these digital collections that we have? Who does own either here with Bruce Willis's case? So this is when he would have been, well, again, you know, it's not a true story. So but you know, he would have been, you know, like all of us buying through iTunes or in the world we live in today, Spotify playlists. And then the question is, you know, in a physical world where we have our CD collections and our vinyl collections, we own those and we can give them to someone. But did your research actually touch on any of this? What do people feel about their collections and its inheritability or its inheritanceness?
A couple of my informants definitely had some very strong familial collections with their parents' records and stuff. Someone had their father pass and inherited the bulk of their collection actually from them. And so there was a lot of strong, like emotional connections and, you know, very memorial almost function from that, which is almost separate from the capacity of the record to play music itself. I think that's a really interesting kind of, you know, tidbit because, you know, in the theory, collections are typically defined by being removed from ordinary use.
So if we think instrumentally, music should be bought to listen to.
Yeah.
Yet here we've got examples of people's value of an album not being its kind of, and it allows me to listen to it.
Yeah.
It's more, it tells me a story of that day with my dad. Or I remember one of the other examples I remember reading in your thesis was signatures on them or people's names on them, right? So when we go to a trash and treasure store or something, it might have the name of the person that owned it or some marks on it. How do those marks feature in collections? Yeah,
that's the biography of the object, I guess, the kind of its story of circulation before it is locked in the magic circle of ownership, as they say in the scholarly literature.
So the biography of the object.
Yeah.
Have you? What were some of the stories around people saying, you know, have a look at this cover because of what we can guess about it from the marks on it?
Yeah, I think in the vinyl collecting space particularly, you everything has its kind of story of how it got into your possession, and you know, someone told you something about it, you know, before they got it or something like that. So I think I went to one of my interviewees' houses and did the interview, and then they said, "Oh, you can have these records if you want." And I said, "Well, what?" And they're like, "Oh, I just kind of got them on a whim. A guy at a record fair was like, 'Oh, I think you'll like these, so here you go.'" And I'm not even sure if he did, but now I'm the custodian of this.
Really?
Yeah, these records.
I love that word, custodian.
Yeah.
'Cause it is an interesting aspect of collecting when you elevate the act to being custodian-like, that you're actually because it could be, you know, taking on that responsibility. It's a wonderful thing in the gift economy, right? That some gifts shouldn't be accepted, right? And because of that, right? Like not everything has a price to it, right? So you've got the financial economy on one side, but then you have this weird economy called the gift economy where people will give you gifts. But this example to me is one of these great moments of the ownership you're taking, or the role and responsibility you're taking on by accepting this offer of take these records.
Yeah.
And because if you become the custodian of these records, you're then kind of, someone could see that as you're kind of weighed down by the need to preserve them, right? That you don't, I mean, you'd feel guilty if you just the next day took them to your Vinnie store. Yeah.
That's an interesting thing that came up throughout the interviews is no one yet of the record collectors that I interviewed had really gotten rid of much. I think someone had sold a few. They kind of had one day where they just culled a few records. But overall, I think a lot of people maybe aren't at that stage where they're giving stuff away too much. So, you know, I definitely have a shelf of, will I say lesser? I would say oddball kind of side discs.
But it is interesting that people using vinyl records to exchange, to give, to lend, the circulation of them. So again, I guess just to go full circle. So while the Bruce Willis story was fake, and then later on it was said that let me read. The Rolling Stone had this quote saying from his wife, I think, Willis grew up in the age of vinyl and went through the ages of 8-track, cassette tape, mini disc, and CD before arriving at the present age of download. Wouldn't a lot of his stuff be on CD? Where do you find collecting gravitating towards? Like CDs, really did dominate many people's, more recent lived history. But they've really devalued in terms of it's kind of, going around to someone's place and then getting shown their CD collection.
Yeah.
But a vinyl, where do people talk?
I think a lot of people say that there's something nice about CDs when they're on a shelf because they're so square and like the way that they stack is so nice, but the jewel cases just like crack really easily. And there's something about the tactility and the materiality of it that's just not as romantic maybe as the kind of the softer cardboard and the bigger product with the record as well. But I
think that's interesting because I think the jewel case for a CD, like if I compare it to a PlayStation 2 box or even a DVD, actually I must admit it's a PlayStation 2. Like I have a fond connection with the PlayStation 2 box, right?
Don't we all?
Oh yeah, because I like the materiality of it in a way, right? But CDs at the same period of time, I just find them to, and also the
trashy.
sound, and sometimes the sound of them, like they have a kind of squeaky sound sometimes. They're compared, particularly when you described to me cardboard of a vinyl, that immediately kind of had this warm feeling.
Yeah, and you'd think it would be, wear out a lot faster, but I think time has definitely shown us that the hard plastic hasn't worn as well. It
hasn't, which is ironic, given that the materiality of it, that is that it's plastic and hard, has been designed so it's been preserved or should preserve. It actually doesn't. And maybe that's that biography of the object tension, right?
I guess if your jewel case cracks, it's not like that warm fuzzy patina of the crack on my. It's like, no, get a new one. I don't need this to be here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you just want to replace it with another CD,
unblemished.
Yeah. And that's what I do with my kids these days. Actually, there's been a couple of conversations I've had with them where they've dropped something. Or that's right, my kid's drink bottle got scratched by a kid at school. Happens all the time, and I said, oh, that just tells a story now. That object tells a story of
it's beautiful.
Time. Yeah. And I know this is something that even looking at, there was a YouTube I was watching of Adam Savage talking about his approach to designing spacecraft, because of course before he did Tested, he was in Industrial Light and Magic doing special effects modeling.
Yeah, smart man.
Yes, very smart man. And he was showing how you weather these models. And he says, one of the most important things, because I think what he was doing was creating a 1970s NASA box, right? A kind of briefcase that would be used in NASA that was metal. Anyway, and then he kind of smashed it up a bit and dented it. And he goes, this is when it gets really fun. Because all these marks are starting to tell a story.
Yeah,
it's starting to let this thing come alive. And this is what I'm reminded of when you talk about these collectors of vinyl records. But okay, so it's one thing to have the cover slightly marked and someone's name on it and a kind of, happy birthday message or something.
Signed by the artist.
Or even, collectible signed by the artist. But then it's another thing if the record's scratched or the record's missed. How does does anyone talk about the kind of fragility of these devices?
I'm glad you brought that up because it's, I think it was Stern. He talked about how because it's analog, when it's damaged, it kind of wears the damage in a way that digital doesn't. He describes digital as soon as it's scratched, it kind of is off the cliff, like it's gone. The digital information is ruined in a way that, if you put
it's corrupted.
It's corrupted. You listen to the CD and it's like complete garbled. Whereas a record kind of, it'll have a scratch, it'll have a pop or a hiss or it'll have something, but there's a better chance of it having the ability to play around it, if you will. Yeah, you can kind of get through it with some tactics.
Yeah, that's an interesting way that Stern phrases that idea that the way we get around that thing which would normally be devalued, it's like there's a pop or a kind of static. Whenever we're listening to vinyl, but that we can still value that positively. That there's a bigger thing going on here that's bigger than this small moment of unsatisfaction. There's a bigger satisfaction there.
Yeah,
still.
And I think it's the fact that it's not completely defaced. That you can see what it is still.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's sufficiently damaged CD, you may not see very much at all.
Well, I love that phrase. When I thought of it, the corrupted,
yeah,
right? That they, like if you've got a digital file on your computer and it's working fine, then all of a sudden you play it one morning and it says file corrupted, and maybe there's been a fault in the hard drive or something, and there's just this sinking feeling because it's gone, man. You're not going to be able to go into the zeros and ones of that file and say, okay, yeah, that should be a 0 now.
Let me fix this right up.
Yeah, you can't go into the file, and so it's gone forever. And do people talk about that kind of backup ability? That okay, with digital, there's a paranoia around backing up. Then, right? So
yeah, there's definitely a bit of that. I read there's a guy who wrote a whole article about his experience of losing his collection and how I think he was doing a backup and when it corrupted, and he was talking about all these his like journey to try and salvage his collection, and he went through these recovery tools, and then it all came back to him, but none of the file names were there, and it was like all garbled characters, and so he was like, it is a collection, but it's no longer mine, because it was like, he couldn't recognize it anymore.
That's such a traumatic moment.
Yeah.
It's a real life and death moment, isn't it? Because you think of the myths that we're surrounded by and legends that tell those stories of immortality, right? That you don't screw with immortality because people that try to become immortal, they never come back the same. Right, the Pet Cemetery narrative. Yeah. This story of the guy trying to back up his music collection, a fault occurring, losing the collection, but then going online looking at how do I get it back, and then going through all of the necromancy.
Yeah, I guess it is a bit of a necromancy.
Involved in bringing
Dark
it back.
arts.
That's right, because it does sound he brings it back from the dead, but it's not the same, right? What he's done is the Pet Cemetery for his collection. He's brought it back, but the titles are all stripped away.
And there's doubles and stuff, and he's like, it's not how I left it,
That's
like
right.
That.
And that the psychology of that moment, that psychology of the uncanniness, that yes, I recognize this as my collection, but I recognize this as not my collection. Right? That kind of double think.
Remnants.
Yeah. That would be even. I mean, that could even be more infuriating, because at least if you lost it and it's gone,
you got to start.
There's a memory of it, right?
True.
There's like what it was, but now you're left with this kind of, and now I've got this half thing, right? It's my collection, not my collection, and that leaves this pregnant pause there in terms of, do I now devote the next year of my life, like I turn it into my job, that every day for 2 hours I sit down and I relabel all of these songs to bring them back to the order they were. But even that journey will result in you not having the collection that it was before it was destroyed, because you've now got that story of the year of your life spent. And people saying, and then you explain that, and the judgment of you around that. Yeah. Right? You're judged through your stories of your collection.
Yes. Look, nowadays, streaming has saved you from that the predicament, they would say.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
We tasted the good life.
This is will not go back. Yeah, this is unusually religious in a way, talking about this. Because it does feel that, yes, Spotify has set us free in terms of the perils of or the dirtiness of downloading files from sources you don't know, or
we didn't even touch LimeWire or anything like that,
or CD burning. Right, you got your collection, but then you want to digitize it so you can put it onto your iPod. But you had some people talk about iPods,
yes,
and other devices. So these are kind of these like when they were here, they made a huge impact. Like iPods were enormous, but it's not like the Sony Walkman with the cassette tape, where that had a really long life cycle. It seemed like the 80s, and if you want to do Stranger Things, or if you want to do a show set in the 80s, you got to do a bullet list of what's there. Okay, the Sony Walkman has to feature somewhere because it's an index into that moment. Yet the iPod, I kind of forgot about it until I read it in your thesis.
Yeah, it went too fast for you.
Yeah, it was there, and I had like 3 of them, and one of them was like super expensive, and it was like 32 gigabytes, and it was the bee's knees, and I spent so much money around the peripherals of it, a mic that went into it, and it was recording interviews, and it was playing music, and I spent overinvested in trying to learn how to use iTunes to sync it, but it's like, did I do that? Yeah, I did that.
Yes.
What was that? And it feels like it was like a never time. But this guy, so the guy that did the iPod, how did he talk about his iPod?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of it was a very collector relationship with the iPod, and it was, this device holds all of the MP3s since I got into MP3s, and so it's the original ripped CDs. It's journeys on the school bus. Someone would have a laptop. And, you're not meant to be able to take music off of an iPod. There's like some DRM, but, those who knew, not that I would condone. And, you could remove the files and share your library with someone else. And all of a sudden your iPod's brimming with new music. And
really? So was that one? I completely forgot. So with iPods, there was a DRM management thing, which meant you couldn't share.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure I was stuck with that.
Yeah.
But it probably shows my limited social network at that point. That it's like it never came up.
Hey, iPods on the bus.
How did the iPod on the bus work?
In the 2000 and whenever it was era, was a big deal. It was quite a social exchange. It was, let me look at your iPod. Let me pass judgment on these artists. Yeah.
There was a tactility to it because the iPod design was the circles.
Yes,
right?
the click wheel.
Yeah, the click wheel, and then you had to use your thumb around it. And I do know at the time there was research around those acts. And I know there were artists incorporating those as kind of like, isn't this weird that our bodies are in sync with devices? And for me, one of my favorite research things I stumbled across, I think it was in an article talking about the dominant digit changes. There have been research looking at how dominant digits work, right? So, of course, if you're pointing, like if someone says, where's the bus? Stop. You'd point with your index finger, maybe. Many of us would. But there was this research project looking at the what was rephrased as the Nintendo generation. These were kids that would play Nintendo Game Boys.
Thumb dexterity.
Then the dominant digit became the thumb, this research was claiming, right? Because of the Game Boy, the little portable Game Boy device, having the thumb as the finger. Is the thumb a finger? Anyway, the hand object you would use to play the Game Boy. And because of that, when people would ask, where's the bus stop, they'd use their thumb to point.
What? That didn't happen.
Well, allegedly in this article on MSN News.
Okay. Yahoo.
True. I couldn't find the source for that. I'm talking with a PhD student. I expect nothing less than to be asked for sources.
Skepticism,
that happen. But anyway, that's what I recall. Maybe this is a new project. What device do you think would genetically rewire our dominant digit at the moment?
I like the idea of a dominant digit.
The dominant digit. That could be my new band name.
Yeah, dominant digit. Very good.
Let's go to music.
Yeah.
All right. So coming up next here on Edge Radio 99.3, listening to Media Tackle with Craig Norris, PhD, joined by Jack Ellis, PhD student. And this is Media Tackle with Craig Norris, PhD.
By the way.
I'm not going for the amusement of it. It's the kind of like wow of it.
Yeah.
But Jack Ellis as well, a PhD student.
PhD in training.
Who is in the final stages of his thesis, exploring the world of streaming, music streaming, and its impact on collections. So before the song break, we were talking about iPods. And about how dominant they were for a short period of time, and the importance of those collections, particularly buses. So the interview that you did with that guy talking about his relationship with his iPod was really indexed to school life.
Yeah, I guess it was a certain time in people's lives. I guess that's why in my research I kind of focused on this Gen Y cohort who kind of have grown up during this kind of digital, transition, I guess, from analog. Their earliest memories a lot of the time were cassette tapes and rarely records, actually. And have come through into the MP3 file, into the iPod, into the streaming era, and some of them now have picked up vinyl in its resurgent state, which is interesting.
So what do you think about the vinyl resurgence? What's going on with people that say they've now gone into vinyl? Do they describe it as being a kind of, the value of that as being...
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of, when I was thinking about the project at the very start, I was thinking, of myself. Like, I think the first record I got was Tame Impala's Lonerism. That had just come out. So it puts me to 2012 or 14 or something like that. And I got it on a whim. I think my brother had got a record player to play something. And I was like, oh, I'll see what this is about, because I was a full digital consumer and everything like that. And then I guess I was privy to the kind of cultural zeitgeist of people buying records, and like, why would you buy a record when you don't even listen to it? Like, what is that about? Why would you do that? So
do you fall into that category yourself?
Well, I DJ a little bit now, so it's, I think that's a state. You go from vinyl collector to vinyl DJ, and so mine have a bit of an instrumental bent to them now, like a kind of, there's a usability, an oblique usability kind of thing to it. Whereas before it was a bit more what my data showed, which was about picking up albums that are really meaningful, things that you wanted to hang on to, like over time throughout your life.
So the act of DJing with vinyl, what has that changed your relationship to the collection? You see it more?
Yeah, I think it has. Yeah, it's gone away from music that I perhaps know I like, and it's gotten me into discovering and finding out new music a lot more, particularly in the kind of like house music, dance music, like 12-inch records kind of thing. So I buy a lot less albums now and a lot more obscure dance music.
and this is almost getting us back to that idea of the custodian role, that in a way you're a kind of a holder of knowledge, a holder of kind of information.
Yeah, I think that the learning is one of the best parts about it. And to tie it back into my thesis stuff, I talk a lot about discovery, and a lot of research at the moment is talking about musical discovery, because it's such a salient part of streaming music experiences. They emphasize of this is your daily mix, this is your discovery playlist and all that stuff. And it's when is the moment of discovery? Is it when you first listen to the song, or is there a more affective moment where you kind of hear it and it responds to something, or it just clicks in your head and you go, I've got a really solid opinion about this now. I've had a little bit of time to figure it out.
How do people talk about their discovery mechanics? Because it is something which is a huge selling point of Spotify and other services, that they will help you discover music because they'll come up with those mixes they'll make for you. And what stories do people tell of that? Do they say it as the marketing would like us to think about it, that they'll say, oh, and I never knew all this music, and now
it's opened me up. Now I'm so omnivorous. No,
does that come up a lot, or are there alternative narratives?
The alternative narrative is definitely anxiety around there being so much music available to them. And so maybe like the role of the algorithm or of these discovery playlists is to kind of funnel that down to something that might be a little bit more manageable. But then the other side of the kind of listening practices perspective is around lean back and lean forward listening. And so whether people are using music playlists in a way that helps them do things rather than listening to music as the thing that they are doing.
So the lean back one is you're studying?
Yeah, you're studying,
you're
cleaning, doing the washing. That came up a lot.
And that's a huge genre, isn't it? Because I know even for me, I suddenly came across articles like on IO9 or Kotaku talking about this famous YouTube playlist that has an anime girl on it. That's just a loop, but basically just a soundscape.
What is it? Lo-fi beats to study to? Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, lo-fi beats to study to.
Yeah.
And I realized that so much time I'd spent on this, and I don't know how, but this was on, and I thought, I'll play this again. And my daughter, who's only 10, then said, "Oh, are you listening to lo-fi beats to study to?"
No, she knew.
And she knew. And I'm thinking, oh my God, she's 10. And she's been also listening to lo-fi beats to study to.
Yes.
And I go, is that the one with the anime girl that you see on the thumbnail? And she goes, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that is dominant. And that's like, because previously you might say, an album might come up as the conversation, like, oh, did you listen to that album? Is the one with the cover like this? Yes, it is. But now we're talking about, is that the playlist on YouTube?
Yeah, exactly. Is that and it's hard to kind of talk about artists in that kind of way. You're like, oh, the anime girl playlist. Yeah, that's sick.
And it's interesting because Rolling Stone recently did their 500 greatest albums of all time, which I have gone back into in terms of wanting to, and I did it almost as a student would, right? Or if I was studying something, it's like, okay, what do I need to study here? What haven't I listened to on this?
You need to know the hot music.
But I've missed. And then I was reading the comments, and this wonderful debate had broken out on the comments around the kind of course, the normal debate, like this shouldn't be there. I can't believe that. Yeah. This is showing all the political prejudices here. Which was interesting. But then, then there was this idea of, I also read comments of people like me saying, actually they were talking about it saying they hate this Rolling Stone playlist, but they liked the previous one from 10 years ago because that one was their entry point and it made sense to them. And now this new one is not the entry point and is crap because it's now changed all these things. And I'm thinking,
yeah, the entry point. I think that's an interesting kind of, because when I was looking at the discovery, I kind of was comparing people who discovered music through these kind of playlist outlets or via online reviews. Anthony Fantano, The Needle Drop. He's this really popular YouTube channel. You know that one?
I probably know of it.
So that might be a good entry point for you.
So Anthony
Fantano, The Needle Drop is the channel, and it's just music reviews. But it's they're entertaining. But I think I compared it, or I asked them to kind of think about those recommendations versus those from friendship groups and how that kind of socially recommended music, whether you spend more time with it, do you put more weight towards those kind of things? Does the algorithm know you as well as your friends?
So I love this phrase, the algorithm. The algorithm. Because it is such a machine logic to it, isn't it? So did some of your participants talk about it in that way? They say, wow, that's just the algorithm and I'm not a machine, right? The algorithm is doing its thing and it has its agenda, which is not about me. I'm a flesh and blood human and I'm connected to flesh and blood.
There was definitely a discourse where it was like, I have no idea what this algorithm is doing. It doesn't get me at all. It's totally bizarre. I'm confused. I can see what the algorithm is attempting to do with my taste, and it is disgusting. It doesn't know what I like about this genre. So you can see, because I've looked into how the algorithm, particularly on Spotify, operates, and it's to do with collaborative filtering. So it uses what other people, the associations other people make to kind of approximate these links between recommendations. So the people that like this typically like that. But there was a lot of people who are, probably a bit more assertive about their musical identity and their taste and stuff like that. And they were, offended.
Almost that interesting. It's not as hardcore as a Luddite attitude, but it has that kind of passion to it that sees it almost as a black and white zero-sum game. I am me, full of free will. And it's interesting though you mentioned that some of your research has brought you into better clarity of how the algorithms work in Spotify and so forth. It's one of the things that's always fascinated me about the journey you're taking in this research area, and I know you've mentioned to me about some of the researchers deeper into this space that it is difficult getting access into these proprietary spaces, right? So Spotify It's like the KFC secret herbs and spices, right? They keep this secret, right?
The Colonel Secrets?
These, like Spotify, they don't discuss their algorithm, do they? Or
No. So yeah, we were talking about a recent book that came out, and it was talking about the black box of Spotify, and they opened the book with a discussion of how they had approached Spotify as researchers and said, look, we'd love to do this work to, complement our other, chapters. And then they were flat out denied access to the thing, I guess because they were afraid, or Spotify was afraid of some kind of, negative press or bad. Because I think, yeah.
And it's interesting because as a researcher, it's so important to understand what these mechanics are doing, right? These mechanics which are being used to determine cultural engagement, right? I mean, it's such a significant... I mean, if we're talking about custodianship, right? And one of the things that I always like about it is many think people would have that movie and book High Fidelity in mind when they think of music and valuing music, right? Here's a book that kind of parodies and pastiches music value, music knowledge, and the guy in the music store.
The High Fidelity stereotype.
Yeah. And there's that great scene where he says, I will now sell 5 copies of, whatever the track is, and he plays it, and he's just got the timing right. And that's an algorithm, right? But he's human.
Yeah.
He's with other humans, and he kind of exhibits almost a magic to it. Whereas as a researcher, there's a code there if you look at Spotify. How does that high fidelity narrative sit in juxtaposition to the type of, algorithm?
Yeah, well, you get the cold machine versus the warm human who, has like an intimate knowledge of the kind of thing. I guess in the research that I did, it really came through to the friends knowing more about you outside of your music taste, I guess. So maybe they know you like this because of a certain experience that you had. Maybe you shared something like that. It went to like a more intimate level of, that kind of area. But also, I was trying to emphasize the role of the collection in the process of discovery, where you did give things time to be discovered, if you will. So something might fly through in a discovery playlist and you might not think of it again, or you might skip through something even if you don't like it in the first 30 seconds. But if you engage in a bit of music management on Spotify or whatever, throw it in a playlist for later if something piques your interest or you think there might be something there, or even if someone's recommended it to you, and then coming back and giving it time to kind of register.
Yeah, look, and how does that sit against the idea that this is an unlimited mass of music, right? That challenge of saying, I'll never live long enough to listen to every song ever made, right? Because like you walk into a music store, JB Hi-Fi or somewhere, and everything is mandated by the size of the store, right? You can only squeeze in so many CDs and vinyl records into that space. So, you can still, your mind can still comprehend that. But with Spotify, I don't know how many songs they've got.
Yeah.
But it's more songs than you'd have time to listen to.
Of course. Yeah, you can never absorb it.
So then you've got this struggle with that huge mass and the existential crisis that can cause, with the kind of, you got to take time and patience and just say, some songs you have to re-listen to. Do people talk about that as well?
Yeah, no, they did talk about that. But on your point, I think that things like that, beats to study to, kind of de-emphasizes that kind of staying with music and like figuring it out, because it's so, I don't want to say like deride that kind of stuff, but it's very audio wallpaper. It feels good to listen to. You can just leave it on. It's productive. But as far as like, I don't know, I don't want to say artistic value, but is there a message behind this, like
it wouldn't
couple of jazz chords and,
That is such an interesting tension because, I guess that's that lean back or lean forward difference, right? So the lo-fi beats to listen to is lean back. You're wanting to get study done, which is your primary thing that you shouldn't be distracted from. And so the music actually shouldn't distract you. That is, it shouldn't get your brain cells firing in a way to say, that's an interesting chord progression. But the lean forward one is the Rolling Stones top 500 albums, which is, here is something to study. Here's a paragraph of its history and its impact in the musical world, which you read, and I do this, right? I'll say, okay, Stevie Wonder's album, okay, and this happened at this particular time in his life, and this was how it changed where he was going or where he goes to next. And these are the tracks that rated well, and this was the one that was quite divisive. I listened to it and I say, yeah, I know this. I know this album.
Yeah, I think in the streaming kind of space where ownership isn't necessarily the most privileged thing in kind of, experiencing and collecting and stuff like that, that kind of knowledge about the music, knowing the kind of a wider context is very much defining the collector. It's an important part of that extra knowledge.
But Spotify doesn't really, give you a Wikipedia entry to read.
Yeah, I think that's a sore spot for a lot of people who would like to do that.
Yeah, it kind of just says this is your music taste. But yeah, and again, that's one of the things about the cultural, I guess, the cultural institution that music is, right? That if it's proprietary based, and if you're actually wanting to use it to grow from, is there a tension there that Spotify is going to emphasize what works with its revenues?
Yeah,
right?
Stakeholders. Yeah.
Actually, this reminds me, one of the points I know we're getting to the top of the hour, but it does remind me of a great conversation I had with you around the thesis where I was giving some feedback, where you were pointing out to me, because I was complaining that one of the streaming stations I was on their cheap plan, and I was trying to find a song, very popular song, but they would only play someone else's version of it.
Oh no!
There's an economy behind that, isn't there? There's streaming stations will actually have a sub-industry creating songs which are like that song.
Oh, right.
Right.
It was. I think. Are you talking about there was a bunch of relaxation playlists, and a whole bunch of the artists people investigated. They're like, oh, they'll love this piano piece. And they did the kind of collector move to be like, oh, I want to know more about this artist. And then all they found was a kind of faceless label in Sweden, where Spotify is based. And it was like, oh. So, and then the narrative was spawned where, Spotify is now creating these ambient playlist fodder artists and populating their own playlists to pay themselves instead of paying actual artists.
So this was like this weird conspiracy theory that was coming out in this economy, where it was this phenomena that certain songs were getting traction, but then songs very much similar to it that you'd say, oh, that is the song, but it's not the song. It's one created in this I don't know, sweat labor child labor thing, replicating not that song but very close to it, and then generating revenue through it. It's one of those spaces which is so confusing and so, again, possibly fake news, that it just kind of feeds into this idea though of comparing vinyl and the high fidelity space to Spotify and the digital space, right? That you having this experience in Spotify, and it reflects that kind of economy, maybe that kind of digital space. Yeah,
I think that's one of the big contributions of my thesis broadly, is the kind of intersection of those two realms, where a lot of people now, everyone that I interviewed was a streaming music consumer. Like even the diehard vinyl people, but it was how do these two kind of technologies intersect? And it was a lot of I discover the music and hear it for the first time on Spotify, and I even continue listening to that throughout my everyday life, just because of the convenience. I don't need to, can't place a record in the car, but they still do buy the record.
Yes, and they still do kind of have that narrative and value of high fidelity, right? That audiophile maybe narrative, or the conversation around it. Well, with Christmas approaching, I feel like we've plugged so many products that there's a lot of interest that'll come up. Well, look, that's been Media Tackle. Any final thoughts? Anything that you wanted to mention that we haven't got it around to?
No, I think we've done a good job, pretty much.
Was there anything that you look back on and kind of didn't think you'd have any knowledge about when you started this project? Anything you look back on and say, wow, I didn't think this project would take me here? Or Well, that was unfortunate how that happened.
No, I had a really good time interviewing all of my participants. So that was a really good time.
Does any of it reflect Tasmania? Was there any particular Tasmanianness of it?
There was a kind of live dimension for people because I think one of the reasons people were streaming first and then buying the record was a discourse around supporting the artist, because they're a recognition that maybe streaming wasn't paying them, particularly smaller artists, and they're not getting, this is a kind of a paid and exposure situation. And so they were like, oh, I'll buy the record and then I'll go and see them live. And then there was, context where, well, they're never going to come here. What am I going to do? And even with COVID as well, it's kind of shot that down pretty hard.
Do you think your project still has like it's one of those ones which even with COVID is more timely?
Well, yeah. In my final conclusion, I kind of point to an increase in record sales during the lockdown phase.
That's true.
In like Melbourne record stores and stuff like that, particularly. Yeah.
That's right. The news article showing that for the first time, vinyls have now outsold CDs. Who knows, CDs are still being sold.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I've mentioned to you before, like in those kind of stats, they don't include secondhand sales, which many records are sold secondhand.
So yeah, that number probably is even lower than it is for record sales, right? Isn't that interesting?
Very.
That the relevance. Well, look, thanks so much, Jack, for coming on. And again, this will be available to listen to on demand if there were particularly complex ideas you would like to review and go back to.
Yeah.
I'll see if Jack can send me a reading list. If you'd like to explore some of these concepts more fully. The black box one, Spotify sounds quite fascinating.
Yeah, look, that's a killer.
Classic.
A classic. Yeah, good nighttime read.
All right, well, thanks everyone for listening. This is Edge Radio. Keep listening as more exciting music around the corner here on Edge Radio 99.3.